Hello, Sarah Lee here, and welcome back to the channel. For today's episode, I plan to walk you guys through how we built our stucco block garden beds last year. There's been quite a bit of interest on how we did it, the materials used, and the stucco process itself, so I plan to share all those details. Originally, I had planned to share this video last year, but there was quite a bit of things going on in the background and a delay in the project. We didn't finish it till like end of June, I believe, which in our original timeline was like April or May, which was very optimistic of us, also knowing that this was our first time laying block to make garden beds. There's definitely going to be a lot of information that you're going to want to save, so don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. For the longest time in our backyard, the shabby overgrown corner space was empty. Nothing really stuck. But I did envision having some garden beds, and I knew that this would stick and begin my garden girl era. We first sketched the space and started digging. The first layer of dirt removed was about 3 inches deep. After leveling out the space, we measured that we could get about 3 garden beds to fit the area, about 5 feet long by 3.5 feet wide to maximize the space as much as possible, leaving about 1.5 feet of space in between. Ideally, if there was more space, leaving 3 to 4 feet of space apart from each garden bed would be recommended for a walking path, but we are working with a tight area here, and I wanted to make sure that we didn't waste any space so we could plant as much as we could in each garden bed. The garden beds are designed to be 3 courses high with caps in place, making it a raised garden bed, sitting about 26 inches tall and 22 inches at ground level. Raised garden beds can vary from height from anywhere from 6 to 30 something inches, so you can really make it as short or as tall as you need it to be. With the plan in mind and the type of block we're going to use, after marking where the garden beds would sit, the lines were dug up double in size of the block width size and 12 to 14 inches deep to pour a concrete footing. There are some that have made the garden beds without concrete footing, but it's usually not recommended. It all depends on your space, your region, and how the ground settles. Adding the footing will help prevent the block and stucco from potentially cracking as the ground settles in again. Before the concrete pour, we laid some leftover rebar and blocks from past projects into it. While this isn't needed for such a small project, it will reinforce the concrete, making it sturdier. Plus, we wanted to get rid of it, so it's a win-win. We placed the rebar off the ground by breaking some concrete blocks to keep it up and tied it up with some metal wiring we had on hand. With the space ready for the concrete footing, meet our new best friend, a rentable concrete mixer. If you don't have the room and don't do this for a living, get yourself to Home Depot's Rent-A-Center and book this bad boy. Mixing a large amount of concrete by hand is a pain. If you haven't rented anything from Home Depot yet, you're missing out. For the day, it costed us $48 after taxes and all. We poured 2 bags of this concrete mix in the mixer, add in the water first. After pouring out the ready concrete, apply the water soon after to get the next load ready so that any leftover concrete doesn't dry out and stick to the walls. In total, we poured 6 loads into each garden bed footing. That subtotals to 12 bags of concrete mix per bed. After pouring, level out the concrete. Use a trowel to make it as smooth as possible. Remove any clumps on the edges. You want to get it as clean as possible to make it easier to lay down the block later on. I made the mistake of getting to it a little too late, and it was a bit of a mess. Rewatching my work again, I'm shouting through the screen to get the clumps on the edges cleaned up and removed. Let this be my passed on fail that you don't make. In the morning, everything was set and we remarked where the blocks would be laid down. We got the mixer prepped again, and this time we're using mortar bags for the joints to lay down the block on top of each other. When building up the walls, 1 or 2 courses high would be sufficient to match the height of standard garden beds, but we ended up with 3 courses, 3 rows high, not including the caps we placed on top. Luna was determined that he didn't want us to bend too far down to take care of our plants. I still think 2 courses would have been nice since the space felt a little too tight already, plus it would also require less materials. Using 16 by 8 by 6 inch blocks, we needed 4 blocks up front and back and 2 blocks on the side to complete the first course. Leveling each block and adjusting it is key to the perfect rows. I can see why most people would want to call it done with 1 course. The more you build up, the tedious it gets. First course has been added all the way around for the garden bed here. Before adding the second and third that we're going to add to make it taller, we're going to move on to the second and third garden bed. Since this requires a lot of bending and making sure everything's even, might as well get these out of the way first and then just build on top of them. Depending on the size of your garden beds, when building up, you may need to customize the row of blocks. The size of our bed required us to use L-shaped blocks and cut some down so we could use for the second course. To avoid this, you can plan around the size of the blocks to make sure it's a perfect fit. In our case, we didn't have enough wiggle room to downsize or make our garden beds bigger, so this was the next best option so we could properly stagger the blocks on top of each other. A most asked question I've seen so far is, how does the drainage work? Like most raised garden beds sold at the store or online, the bottoms are open. We're only making the surrounding frame. Now close to a year of having these up, we haven't had any issues with flooding or overwatering, but we're also not leaving the hose on and leaving it there either. If your area tends to rain a lot, consider adding weeping holes at the bottom of the first course, which is a narrow slit, a space you leave open for the water to come through. But honestly, I don't think it's needed, but just throwing an option out there for you. After the second course, the third course will be exactly like the first course using full blocks. It was only the second course that needed to be a bit customized to make it all fit. After completing 3 courses on each garden bed, we had the mixer running again to fill the columns with concrete mix. Filling the columns will help strengthen them to support the blocks against the water and soil pressure against it. To save on concrete mix, you can also add any broken concrete block pieces or brick to help fill them alongside the concrete mix. Just a little bit of a tip there for you. Once filled, we added the caps on the top of the concrete blocks. This will help to make it easier to apply the stucco over later on and just gives it a finishing look. Before finishing up, we went around cleaning up the mortar joints. You want to do this to make sure that there are no gaps and everything is flat as possible. Of course, this would have been easier to do to adjust while the mortar was fresh, but here we are trying our best. Overall, for the first time laying blocks ourselves, it was hard work, I'm not gonna lie, and I wouldn't say we're pros or that it was perfect. I'm sure someone seasoned, of course, could do it so much better, but it did it for us. Now we're finally ready to begin the stucco process. It gets a bit messy, so laying down a plastic tarp around the beds and the inside is a good idea. It makes it so much easier to clean up afterwards. Now let's talk about stucco. Traditionally, it's a 2-part application process depending on the materials you're going to be using, but there are different brands, types of stucco, or similar products to achieve the same look. In a traditional method, the first layer coat is called a scratch and brown. It is applied with a trowel and it creates a rough layer that your final finish can bond to. Without it, any coats of other materials won't bond to the block and will eventually chip. It helps to create the first even layer around the block, and the one I'm using and easily you can find at the Home Depot is Labra. Before application, mist the blocks before you begin. This will help with adhesion when applying. When layering it, it should be around 3/8 to 1/2 inch in thickness at the end. Soon after applying it to your wall, use a hard float against the surface, floating in a circular motion, pulling some of the aggregate to the surface. This step helps for the second part application, the final finish, to adhere bond to the scratch and brown coat. Float gently and not too hard because you don't want too much aggregate to come up to the surface either. Now let's talk about some trials and errors that we realized a little too late so you can learn from our mistakes, and if we were to do it again, this is how we would do it. Don't add any layers of the stucco process inside the garden walls. It seems like a no-brainer, but just a word of caution just in case. I'm not sure why I didn't consider it before, probably a combination of heat and already working on this for a few days that we were just in a robot mode. So make sure to leave the concrete blocks bare in the inside walls. Or better yet, apply it to the point of the soil line but not in contact with the soil. Most stucco methods come with fiberglass additives for reinforcement. It's only really dangerous as loose particles. But before you panic, a lot of planters are made of mixed additives like fiberglass, so it's fine for the outside of your garden boxes. Because I got carried away, we're going to have to use a plastic liner. In summary, if I did it again, I would bring it down only into the interior, a few inches down, not in contact with the soil, and if you're a worrywart like me, just cover the front walls and cover the tops with a stone surface instead. Another lesson learned is which side to begin applying first. Start with the tops and then the side walls. We did the opposite, starting with the side walls first and then the tops, and the tops created a weird layer over it versus smoothing out completely. So learn from that mistake and start first with the tops. Here's a look at it once dried with the aggregate showing through. Looking back at our first coat, we should have coated it with the second layer of the scratch and brown coat to make it more even. Later on, we noticed that the blocks were not as even as we thought and the joint lines were showing through in some areas. As is, it's still workable, but we had to compensate it by using more product of the final finish, which is more expensive. Before moving on to the next part, brush off any loose aggregate to prep for the next step. Now for the second part to this 2-part method application. There are 2 types of smooth stucco. The traditional smooth stucco that comes in in a dry mix, or an acrylic synthetic stucco, which is pre-mixed in a bucket. Either of those options, they have standard colors to choose from, or you can also get a custom color made directly from the source. For the project, we went with synthetic stucco, but now I wish we had gone with the traditional since it sources more natural materials and less man-made, which would have been better for the garden bed. Synthetic stucco has an adhesive added to increase its longevity, which worried me after I placed it in the interior of the bed. On the outside, I think it could have been fine to use, but it had me really questioning. A questioning probably better ask the company manufacturer, and I'm telling you my feels right now and things I later question so we can all live longer, healthy lives DIYing. It also helps to know in case you're contracting out and you want to know more about the materials. La Abra carries the traditional bags, and I would recommend the color oatmeal if you're trying to replicate a similar color that we have. Between both styles of stucco, they are applied the same way and require at least 2 to 4 coats depending on how smooth you want your finish. I did notice that the synthetic stucco dries a lot quicker. Make sure to keep a spray bottle on hand or a hose with a mist nozzle to keep the area wet if you're still working in the area. You want it misted but not rolling wet. A handy tip, keep a foam paintbrush and a cup of water on hand. Dip the brush in water and gently go over the corners to smooth them out. Works 10 out of 10. Similar to the scratch and brown coat on the walls, get a decent amount onto the trowel and try to apply it in one fell swoop in vertical rows from bottom up. Working over the wall works so much better for me than working outside of the wall. Even the position you work while doing this is a technique and you should consider. When applying the color coat finish, it's applied 1/8 inch thick. It's also why it takes several coats to get it smooth enough. After applying the first layer of the color coat, you can apply another coat after several minutes. In total, we added 3 coats of the final finish to complete it. Towards the end, if need be, you can wet sand the rough areas to get it a bit smoother. Now what was left was cleaning up the beds, adding some weed blocker around the surrounding areas to get ready for the pea gravel to come in. We've completed a few landscaping projects in the past, and a question I get quite often is where do we source our landscape rock, and thought I might as well add it in here for reference. If you have a big project coming up, check out your local landscaping yards. I have one close by me. I've gone for all my projects called Pioneer Sand Landscaping, I believe, and they have several locations all over the nation, so I'm sure you probably have one close by you too. Originally, we had planned to order 1 ton, but ended up with 1.6 tons of pea gravel because the controller didn't close it up right away, so we ended up with the excess and still had to pay for it. So note to self and to you, ask them for a little less than what you need because they're always going to give you a little extra. The cost came down to $117 including taxes, and we had it delivered for $50 to $60, I believe, from a private driver. They had a business card on file, which is separate from their delivery service. That was actually really nice of them that they gave us another delivery service option, even if it took money away from them. Moving on to adding the liner, as you might recall my big time rookie mistake, adding the stucco on the inside walls, in case you forgot. If I hadn't done that, I would have left the walls bare or filled it with a natural weaved husk liner. I found a HDPE liner used in garden beds, aquaponics, and ponds that I feel certain it will do the job and not leach any substances into the garden beds. I'll make sure to link the liner in the description in case you're looking for it. All I did to hold it up was using exterior tape on the edges of the top so we could fill it with the soil later on. A day after calling our local soil farm, we had 2 cubic yards of raised garden soil mix and 1 cubic yard of untreated wood mulch delivered. The mulch is 1 part palo verde and 1 part mesquite. It's perfect to use as a weed blocker for the bottom. It also helps with drainage, and it's a general cost saver when you have a large and deep garden beds to fill like these. We filled the beds about 1/4 up from the bottom with mulch, and the remainder was filled with raised garden soil. Ordering in bulk from a local soil farm was so much more affordable than individual bags, and of course it's healthier as well and eco-friendly, and you have a better idea of how it's all processed. Near the end, I can't tell you how ecstatic I was to fill the garden beds with our plant babies. We didn't have the chance to grow much with it now being dead of summer, but with that in mind, I started drawing up plans for a canopy shade to go over the garden beds to protect our plants. I hope this tutorial of how we made our garden beds was informative and helpful. If you watched it to the very end, you know there was a lot of lessons learned, and versus it necessarily being a complete fail, I feel like it was still success in our book since we were to pivot, still making it functional and making it look fairly good in my opinion. I mean, yeah, of course, with everything that we do know now, I feel like it would turn out so much better if we could have started with this information from the very beginning, had someone teach us, or had any of this information consolidated on the internet. Would have been so great, but that didn't happen. But if anything and all else, I hope that this video can be that for you guys. Next up, I have the video coming out of how I made the garden cage housing that is sitting on top of the garden beds. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to get the next update.